Elisha could blind an entire army with a single word, and he did. When he had them on their knees, hungry, disarmed, unable to see the way out, he did not raise his hand against a single one of them. The king of Israel shouted at his side, begging for permission to slaughter them all, one by one, right there in the center of his own city. The prophet asked for something else. He asked for bread. He ordered the table to be set for the men who had crossed the border at night with a single purpose, to take his head. He sat them down, broke bread before them, and when they had finished eating, he let them go alive by the same road they had come to kill him. Many learned from this. A tender scene, a lesson in kindness. The prophet who returned good for evil, and everyone went away in peace. What they almost always leave out is what happened afterward, because that same army came back. And the second time there was no table, no bread, no mercy to share. The second time, inside that city, there were mothers who ate their own children. To understand why a man who could destroy hundreds chose to feed them, you have to go back to the previous night, and to a war that was not fought with swords, but with words spoken in rooms where no one was supposed to hear them. The king of Aram did not lose battles out of bad luck. He lost them because someone knew. He gathered his generals in the darkest part of the night, closed the doors, and spoke in a low voice. Here tomorrow, at this pass between the hills where the road narrows, we will wait for the Israelites and fall upon them like a stone from above. They made these decisions behind closed doors with the lamp flickering over the map, and went to sleep confident that no one outside that room knew the plan. And when they arrived at the pass, there was no one there. The powerful army of Israel had taken yet another route, always another route, as if they had heard every single word. It happened once. The king attributed it to chance. Wars are full of plans that go awry, of enemies who guess, of nights when luck changes sides. He let it go. It happened twice. And twice is no longer luck. Twice is a pattern. And patterns have causes, and causes have names. The king began to look at his men differently. He started keeping track of who entered and who left the room. He began to sleep worse. It happened a third and a fourth time, and the king of Aram stopped believing in coincidence. Every plan born in the darkness of his chamber died in the light of day, empty, useless, as if the enemy had been sitting beside him while he devised it. And a man who feels he is being read from the inside ceases to be a king and becomes a frightened man with a crown. He summoned his men and looked at them one by one. His voice came out broken with suppressed rage. "There is a traitor among us. Someone in this room is selling my plans to the king of Israel. Tell me now, which one of us is with the enemy?" Imagine the silence in that room. Men who had bled together, glancing at each other out of the corner of their eyes, calculating which of the familiar faces was hiding betrayal. Each one suspecting the other, each one wondering if he would be the first to fall under accusation. And then one of the officers spoke. What he said changed the atmosphere in the room. "None of us, my lord. There is no traitor. There is a prophet. In Israel there lives a man named Elisha, and that man reports to his king the very words you speak in your private bedroom, the words you say in the privacy of your chamber. He repeats them word for word out loud miles away. It wasn't a spy hiding behind a curtain. It wasn't a servant who had been bought. He was a man who, from another city, could hear what was whispered in the dark. The king did not have an enemy inside his hall. He had an enemy inside his own head. Most people, faced with such a threat, would have tightened security. The king of Aram did the opposite. He decided to go after the ear. If a single man could hear every word, then that man was worth more than any fortified city. He had to be uprooted. He asked where he was. They answered him, "In Dothan." And here the story lowers its voice, because what the king sent against an unarmed man, against an old man living in a stone house in a small village, was not a detachment, nor a patrol, nor a group of discreet assassins sent to do a quiet job. He sent a powerful army, horses and war chariots, a formidable force capable of taking over an entire city. They advanced at night in silence. and surrounded Dothan while its inhabitants slept. When the sun rose, the city was encircled by a ring of iron and flesh. There is something almost absurd in that image, and it is worth not overlooking it. An entire kingdom, with all its cavalry, with its war chariots, with the men it would have needed to devastate an entire region, deployed in the darkness against a stone house where an old man and his servant slept. They didn't send an assassin, they didn't send a handful of men with knives. They calculated that to silence just one, everything was needed. And that number says more than any description. It measures the fear that a man inspires when a king feels that to silence him, it is not enough to kill him quickly, but he must be surrounded by an army, as if a single voice could slip through fewer spears. A word appears twice in all of Scripture, and we will come back to it. The first to wake up was not the prophet, but his servant. He went out at dawn, still with sleep clinging to his eyes, perhaps to fetch water, perhaps just to breathe the cold morning air. And when he looked up at the towering hills, the bitterly cold air froze in his chest. They were everywhere around him. Horses where there had once been stone, chariots where there had once been silence, spears reflecting the first light of day in an unbroken line that surrounded the entire city without a single gap to escape through. The horizon had closed in during the night, and no one had heard it arrive. He ran inside. His voice was breaking. "Oh, my Lord, what are we going to do? We are surrounded. There is no way out. We are lost." It was true. Every word the servant said was true. Just two men, a stone house, a village without any real walls against an approaching army. Anyone who looked at that scene with open eyes would reach the same conclusion as he did. They were dead. All that was left was for someone to give the order. And the prophet, who could also count horses, who also had eyes to see the iron gleaming on the hills, responded with a calm that did not match anything seen outside. "Do not be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And before continuing, it is worth knowing who the man was who spoke those words. Because if in your mind Elisha is a sweet old man, a kind elderly man with a white beard and gentle hands, you have inherited only half a portrait, and that portrait will keep you from understanding what comes next. This was the man who, years earlier, had been mocked by a group of boys at the entrance to a city. They called him bald, shouted at him to keep going up, to get out of there. And from that encounter there was no sermon about patience. 2 she-bears came out of the forest, and 42 broken bodies were left on the road. This was the man who, when his own servant deceitfully lied to secretly keep a foreigner's silver, did not correct him with words. Instead he covered him and his descendants with leprosy, white as snow, forevermore. This was the man of the chariots of fire, the one who saw invisible armies on the mountains, who anointed kings and toppled dynasties with a softly spoken phrase. We are not dealing with a pacifist, we are not dealing with someone incapable of causing harm. We are dealing with a man who knew better than almost anyone the exact price of blood, because he had made it flow. And soon that same man will have an entire army, blind and defenseless at his feet, and he will do exactly the opposite of what his own story would lead one to expect. The servant for now knew nothing of this. He only knew that he was surrounded. And from where the servant stood there was no way to argue with that. He had just counted an army. His master told him that on their side there were even more. And around him there was no one, not a single soldier, not an ally. 2 men in a stone room and an old man talking about crowds that didn't exist. What did Elisha see that the servant did not? The prophet did not argue, he did not explain. He did something simpler and stranger. He asked that the servant's eyes be opened, that he might see what he saw. And the servant looked again toward the mountain. What the army of Aram had at their backs without knowing it was fire. The entire hillside blazed with horses of fire and chariots of fire, a host of light surrounding the city outside the ring that encircled it. The men of Aram believed themselves to be the hunters. They themselves were inside a trap they could not see. There was light where there should have been none, and that light was not on their side. The servant, who a minute before had thought himself a dead man, now trembled for a different reason. The fear had not disappeared, it had simply changed owners. And then something happened that no servant could have foreseen. Elisha did not stay in the house. He did not wait for the fire to come down from the mountain to do its work. He did not ask for the light to consume the army that had come to kill him. He got up, crossed the doorway, and began to walk. He alone, unarmed, without escort, walked directly toward the men who were searching for him, the hunted walking toward the hunters. An old man crossing the open field toward the spears, while the sun beat down on his neck and the dust rose beneath his sandals with every step. Each step brought him closer to those who had come to slit his throat, and he neither hurried his pace nor slowed it. When he was close, he did not shout. He did not challenge anyone. He spoke with the calm of someone who already knows how it all ends. In a low voice, he asked that those men be struck blind, and the light went out for them. Here we return to that word, the one that appears twice in all of Scripture. It is not the blindness of one born without sight, nor the total darkness of someone left groping in the night. It is something else, a clouding, a veil over judgment more than over the eyes. The same word that once fell upon the men who surrounded a door in Sodom, striking at the air without finding the entrance that was right in front of them. It is not that the army of Aram stopped seeing, but that they stopped recognizing, stopped knowing where they were, what they were looking at, or who was standing before them. And in the midst of that disoriented army, blind in a way they could not understand, a calm voice appeared, the voice of their prey. This is not the way, this is not the city. Follow me, and I will take you to the man you're looking for. And the man they were looking for was him. He was right in front of them. They had crossed a border, marched by night, and surrounded a city for him. And now he was just an arm's length away, speaking to them, offering to guide them to himself, and they believed him. That is the part that is hard to accept. Not the blindness, the obedience. Hundreds of soldiers, men trained to be suspicious, to sense a trap, entrusted their entire course to a voice they could not see. They placed a hand on the shoulder of the man in front of them. They formed that long chain of men moving forward without knowing where they were going and set off behind the enemy. To entrust your entire path to the wrong person, believing you are heading one way while actually going in the exact opposite direction, is enough to break a man on his own. Here, it was happening to an entire army step by step without any of them knowing it. The sun rose higher, the road stretched on, dust was kicked up by hundreds of feet that could not see where they stepped, and it settled on the napes of necks, on shoulders, and on spears that were now useless. The heat pressed down, thirst began to scratch at their throats, and at the front marched an old man without a weapon, setting the pace for an army that followed him like a flock follows its shepherd, without suspecting that the shepherd was leading them to the slaughterhouse. A long, winding chain of blind men, each one clutching the shoulder of the one in front, fingers digging deep into the fabric and flesh, because letting go meant getting lost. The relentless scraping of sandals against stone and earth, the clinking of useless weapons hitting their thighs with every step, and the labored, heavy breathing of hundreds of lungs climbing a steep slope they could not see the end of. And above all, the silence of men who no longer spoke, because to speak would have been to admit the fear growing at the center of each one. At some point, one of those men must have felt that something was off. The unfamiliar path was simply too long. The ground began to change noticeably beneath their feet, shifting from the loose earth of the outskirts to something much harder, more trodden, and closer to a city. The air carried new smells, smoke from household fires, the stench of many people living together, distant sounds from a population much larger than any border town. A part of them knew, without being able to see it, that they were being led inside something, not outside. But blindness is not only of the eyes. Once you have given your trust, it is easier to keep going than to doubt. To doubt meant letting go of the chain, staying behind, getting lost alone in a territory you could not see. So each man gripped the shoulder in front of him a little tighter, swallowed his suspicion, and kept going. And they all kept going until the guide stopped. Finally they had arrived. They were inside Samaria, the capital, the heavily fortified and ancient heart of the kingdom they had come to destroy. Walls all around them, streets known only to the locals, and they were completely and utterly blind, at the very center of the most dangerous place in the world for an invading enemy army. Then Elisha asked for their eyes to be opened again, and the light returned. Imagine that moment from within the army. Just a moment ago you were marching behind a voice, certain you were on your way to the man you were seeking. And suddenly the veil falls, your sight returns, and the first thing you see is not the open field of Dothan. It's walls, tall walls everywhere. Israelite soldiers stand at every exit, on every single rooftop and at every narrow alleyway. Their sharp spears are pointing inward, aimed directly at you, and right in front stands the old man himself, the one who heard the king's deepest secrets in the dark, the one who asked for blindness, the one who led them step by step into the very heart of the trap. The sound of that moment must have been terrible. Hundreds of men regaining their sight at once, realizing at once, and understanding at once that there was nothing they could do. Hands searching for a sword that suddenly felt as light as a toy. Eyes looking for exits and finding them all closed. The formation broken, undone, turned into a heap of frightened men in a square they did not know. They had walked of their own accord into the mouth of the kingdom they had come to destroy, and the mouth had closed without a single blow. The chain of men that had advanced confidently became, in a second, a trapped crowd, without formation, without direction, without the slightest chance of fighting their way out of that stone labyrinth. The king of Israel saw it from above. He saw the army that for years had ambushed him at every turn, that had filled his nights with fear, now kneeling, disarmed, defenseless, served up on a platter within his own walls. And the blood rushed to his head. He turned to the prophet. The question escaped him twice, choked with desire. "Shall I kill them, my father? Shall I kill them?" Stay with that question. Don't let it pass by so quickly. Look at the king's hands as he asks it. One of them, almost certainly, is already on the hilt, his knuckles white, his breath short, years of sleepless nights, of ambushes, of his own men dead in the mountain passes. All of that rising up in his chest at once, demanding release. He doesn't ask once, he asks twice. And the repetition isn't doubt, it's longing. It's a man who has already decided and is only looking for the word that will let him begin. Because that king was not a monster, he was a man with every reason in the world. These were the soldiers who had wanted to slit his people's throats, who had crossed his border, who would have razed his villages without blinking if luck had fallen on the other side. He had them. At last he had them, and the one and only thing he asked for was the simple permission to do what any king would do, what justice seemed to demand, what war always demands. And something inside whoever listens to this story leans instinctively and quite unintentionally toward that king. A part of us also counts the years of ambushes. We also measure the accumulated fear. We too silently want the sword to fall. We come to this story expecting the end of every war, the enemy defeated, punishment served, blood repaid with blood. The king's question is our own question spoken aloud. Should I kill them? Isn't this what they deserve? And for a second, before hearing the answer, we are all on the side of the knife. The prophet replied, "No, do not kill them. Do you kill those you have taken captive with your sword and your bow? Set bread and water before them, let them eat and drink and return to their master." Here lies the heart of it all. Here is the scene that the softened versions preserve as a tender picture. And here, precisely, is where the story is more uncomfortable than it seems, because the table Elisha ordered was not a gentle gesture, it was a blow, the hardest of all. He ordered bread to be brought, lots of bread. He ordered a feast to be prepared for the army that had come to kill him. And in the center of Samaria, under the gaze of a king who clenched his fist around the hilt of his sword, the men of Aram sat down to eat. Hands that just hours before had wielded spears were now breaking bread. Mouths that had sworn destruction were now chewing the grain of the land they had come to burn. Israelites and enemies at the same meal, while the king's sword remained in its sheath because the prophet had said it should stay there. Bread broken in the hands of men who had come to kill each other. Think about what that does to a soldier. You had crossed the border convinced of your strength. You had been blinded by a single word. You had been paraded like cattle into the heart of the enemy. And when the moment finally arrived when you could die as true warriors do, with a sharp sword at your throat, rather than granting that honor, they sit you at a table, feed you, treat you as a guest, and escort you back to your own lands alive, full and humiliated to your very core. They didn't kill you. They deliberately chose to spare your life in front of everyone, and you'll have to go back to your king and tell him that the enemy fed you. There are defeats that leave behind the dead, and there are defeats that leave living witnesses of your humiliation, walking back home to tell the tale. Elisha's mercy was not the gentle ending to a story of war. It was a weapon no sword could match. They ate, drank, and left alive, each one carrying something heavier than a wound. Imagine that journey back, the same dust, the same sandals, the same hills, but now with their eyes opened and their heads bowed. An army that had crossed the border confident in its strength, now returning without a single prisoner, without a single spoil, without a single victory to show. They couldn't even say they had fallen fighting. They had been blinded with a single phrase, paraded like cattle, fed like guests, and sent back like children whose lives had been spared. Every step on the way back was a step toward the question that awaited them at home. And the prophet, "Did you bring him?" And the answer, "He fed us, he let us go." There's no way to tell that story without it sounding like shame. And a humiliated soldier returning home carries with him a wound that never heals, one that burns more slowly than any cut and takes longer to claim its toll. And the story closes this part with a brief, almost calm line. And the bands of Aram never again came into the land of Israel. That's where the version that is told ends. The prophet won without bloodshed. The enemy learned the lesson. Peace arrived. Everyone is happy. Turn off the lamp. The story has ended well, only the lamp doesn't go out there. The story says they stopped coming. The next chapter says exactly the opposite, because there is a gap between words and facts that is worth facing head-on. It's one thing that they stopped coming in those small bands, in those nighttime raids by a few men who set ambushes in the mountain passes. Those did come to an end. What came afterward was not a small band. Following these significant events, the historical narrative recounts that after the table, after the bread, and after the peace, the very king of Aram gathered his entire army. Not a patrol, not a detachment sent to capture a man. All of it. And he marched again on Samaria, the same city where they had eaten bread as guests. And this time he did not enter blind or unarmed. This time he surrounded it from the outside with all his might and sat down to wait. He besieged it, cut off the roads, sealed the gates from the outside, and let hunger do the work that spears had not been able to do. The siege was long. You don't take a capital in a single night. You kill it very slowly. Many weeks went drifting by. The first thing to run out was what came from outside, the caravans, the markets, the grain from the fields that now belonged to the enemy. Then the city's warehouses were emptied. After that, people began to hide what little they had left in their homes, and neighbors started looking at each other with suspicion, calculating who was hiding what. Hunger does not arrive all at once. It comes like water rising in a closed room. First to your ankles, and one day, without you knowing when, it covers your mouth. It lasted so long that inside Samaria, bread disappeared. First, its price started to climb. Then, it became a rare luxury. After that, it simply ceased to exist. And when the bread ran out, people began to buy things they would never have touched before. A donkey's head, the most impure animal of all, meat that no Israelite would ever eat, came to cost a small fortune in silver. And for a bit of dove dung, pure filth disguised as food, people paid sums that, in times of plenty, would have bought a house. That city, which once served bread in abundance to its enemy, now had no bread for its own children. Look at the journey a single thing has taken. The grain that was broken at the banquet table, the same that filled the mouths of the soldiers of Aram, the same that was so plentiful it could be given away to the enemy. That bread no longer exists in this city. Where there was once abundance to forgive, now there is a maddening emptiness. What was once given with open hands is now missing from those very hands. And then the king of Israel, walking along the wall inspecting his defenses, heard a voice calling to him from below. A woman was asking him for justice. Annoyed, he replied that if even the Lord would not help her, what could he possibly do? There was no grain left on the threshing floor, no wine left in the winepress. What do you want from me? But something in the woman's persistence stopped him. What's wrong? And she spoke. What she said cannot be softened. This woman proposed a deal to me. She said, give up your son and we will eat him today. Tomorrow we will eat mine. So we cooked my son. We ate him. And the next day I said to her, now give up your son so we can eat him too. But she had hidden him. That's why I come to you, so that the deal is fulfilled. Hunger had sunk so deep within those walls that 2 mothers had agreed to eat their own children. One had kept her word, the other had hidden her child. And what the first was demanding from the king, as if claiming a debt, was the body of the second child. When the king heard this, he tore his robes, and as the fabric ripped, those nearby saw what he wore underneath, pressed against his skin. A hair shirt, rough cloth of mourning and penance, hidden beneath the royal garments. That king who once clenched his fist around his sword, eager to slaughter an army that had been delivered to him on a silver platter, now walked along his city wall with his body covered in sackcloth, unable to feed even a single woman of his people. The same setting, the same city, the same walls that once imprisoned a defenseless enemy, now imprisoning his own people with hunger. Where once there was bread in abundance for those who came to kill, now the flesh of children is divided among those who came to survive. And here the story forces a question that no one wants to ask out loud. What then did Elisha's table achieve? The easy answer is a trap. It would be easy to say that forgiveness brought the line to the siege, that feeding the enemy invited him to return stronger, that mercy was a mistake paid for with the flesh of the children. That is not what the story says. The story does not connect the 2 scenes with an arrow of cause and effect. It simply places them side by side with those 2 words in between. After this. But it puts them together, and by putting them together it leaves a weight on the table that no gentle reading can lift. Because the question is not whether Elisha was wrong. The question is more uncomfortable than that. Does a victory without a single death truly resolve a war, or does it merely postpone it? Does the enemy who returns home alive and humiliated stay at home, or does he come back one day with his entire army and hunger as his ally? Did the prophet's perfect mercy save that city, or did it merely buy it a little time before a much greater horror? The story does not answer, and that silence is the most disturbing part of the whole tale. There are those who will say that you are measuring time incorrectly, that the famine in Samaria ended, that God lifted it the next day in a way no one expected, and that the siege was broken and the walls were once again filled with bread. And it's true, the line ended, but not because of the king's sword, not because of strategy, not because of anything resembling a human victory. It ended in the same way that what happened in Dothan began, with something the army of Aram could not see, coming from behind, in the darkness. Light returned where there should have been none. Once again. As if this whole story, from beginning to end, was about who sees and who does not, and about what each person does with what they believe they are looking at. But between the table and the siege, between the bread that was left over and the bread that was missing, there remains that dark stretch that no one illuminates. The stretch in which a forgiven enemy goes home, gathers all his men, and once again sits in front of the same walls, this time in silence, waiting. Before you hold on to the tender image of this story, the kind prophet who gave bread to his enemies, also remember the other one, the one that is almost never told alongside the first, even though it lives on the same page, just a few lines away. This is not the only story you learned only halfway. There are others hidden just after the happy ending where no one looks for them. If you want to hear them as they truly sound, complete, with the part that usually gets cut, this is the only place where I tell them, and the next one will weigh heavier than this one. I don't tell it to everyone. I tell it to those who come back. Make sure you're here when it arrives, because now you already know what happened after the table. Go back for a moment to the beginning, to the hands. Hands of soldiers and hands of Israelites breaking the same bread at the same table in the heart of Samaria. The soft grain beneath their fingers, the smell of baked wheat filling a room where, just minutes before, blood was about to be shed. Men who had come to kill, eating from the hand of the man they had come to kill. And now place that image next to the other one. The same streets, the same walls, and a mother's hands that no longer hold bread because there is none. Hands that baked something no mouth should ever name. The silence of a woman who hid her son while another claimed his body as a debt. The rough scrape of sackcloth against the skin of a king who can do nothing. Between those two images lies the whole story. The same bread, the same setting, the same prophet who heard the enemy's secrets in the darkness and who just once chose not to shed blood. Elisha could blind an army with a single word. He did it and chose bread over the sword. No one will ever know for sure whether it was mercy or simply the first move in something that would take time to exact its price. The story doesn't resolve it. It simply leaves the table set, and just a few lines later, the table is empty.